the idea overcoming negativity. That's sort of the central focus of the Pathwork. And the guide gives a 4-step process for doing that. And the first one is you've got to recognize, first of all, the guide first starts out saying, as we always say in the Pathwork, that you're not a victim. That's kind of a heavy thing, and because in the Pathwork, that concept is very broad. You know, that concept is so wide-ranging that really anything you experience has to come from yourself. So I'm just touching on that, but step number 1 is to understand that negative creation, it's interesting that the guide says that we constantly create, right? Negatively as well as positively, which is very interesting, right? I mean, it makes a lot of sense. So if you can imagine that in your life, creativity is always going on. Sometimes it's negative, sometimes it's positive. I mean, I think that everybody talks about how they create negative situations. It's easy. People always reflect on the negative situations that they sort of by accident create. Anyway, so it's very important to acknowledge that one does create negatively. And the guide says there's a huge difference between people, some people that acknowledge that they create negatively and people who do not. So those of us who are following the spiritual path, we acknowledge that we do create negatively. So the guide again says, you know, what I just said about being a victim. He says, quote, to believe that your unhappiness and suffering are inflicted on us by others or by life is utter folly. It is insanity to believe that any unhappiness can accrue from something outside of or other than the self. Now that is a kind of earth-shattering phrase, concept, really. Because, you know, you think, well, what if I'm in a concentration camp? What if I'm being tortured? Did I do that to myself? You know? So the guide says, well, the answer to that, it's a subtle answer, but the answer, it boils down to yes. It boils down to, and the guide also talks about that you cannot be affected by anyone else unless there's something inside you that the negativity can latch onto. And I think this is really very Gandhi-esque, you know, the Gandhi-esque principle of nonviolence, which is resistance and keeping yourself in a state of peacefulness, not hooking into the cycle of victimization, aggression and victimization. And if you don't hook in and partake in that cycle, then you're not affected by the negativity. All right, so just to recap what the lecture says, step 1 is to, and the guide kind of gives these laundry lists of what you have to do. Find, determine, acknowledge, accept, and observe your own negative attitudes, destructive feelings, spiteful lies, intention to cheat, and life-defeating, spiteful resistance to good feelings. Now that, I think, is a very interesting phrase, because when you ask yourself the question, well, what really is meant by negativity? What exactly is negativity? Most people think, well, it's anger. You want to kill somebody, you're hateful, you want to destroy. But I think for people, and the guide says this a lot, you know, that we're not quote unquote criminals. You know, we're not making our living by suffering of other people, by exploiting other people. And for folks that are not actively creating negatively, this concept of life-defeating, spiteful resistance to good feelings, that's a very interesting definition of negativity, I think. And I think it has to do with that, you know, the 7th deadly sin of sloth, which is, I think, also called accidia in the Catholic doctrine, which basically is refusal to bring the best of yourself to life, which is a sin because we're here to do one thing, right? We're here to bring the best of ourselves to life. That's really why we're here. And if we don't do that, if we give in to what he calls the life-defeating, spiteful resistance to good feelings, that is negativity. So the step two is once you realize that you are creating negatively, you have to find the pleasure in it. You have to find the perverse pleasure in it. Um, I mean, it's familiar, right? I mean, to feel pleasure in in negativity, to feel joy at somebody else's misfortune. Um, it's hard not to, right? Um, like, you can feel good about a cop being beaten up in a demonstration, something like that, whatever. Black Lives Matter. I just went to a demonstration in Brooklyn. Um, but it's difficult to disengage from negativity, and the pleasure that you take in negativity. So I think this is sort of the crux of the lecture, which is that the guide puts forward this very interesting and valuable concept, which is the pleasure of creating, either positively or negatively, the pleasure of creation. If you're creating something, there's a pleasure about it, whether it's positive or negative. But our problem is that we think that the pleasure we're getting out of negative creation, we think that if we give it up, if we give up the negative creation, we give up the pleasure. But the guide says in the lecture that we can actually move that pleasure over into positive creating. We're not losing the pleasure. If we give up the pleasure of the negative creation, we can find the pleasure again in positive creation.
Alan, can you give an example of that? Because I was reading that and I'm like, whoa, how's that happen? Like, what's
Oh,
that look
okay.
like?
What does it look like to take that pleasure and transform it into the pleasure of positive creation? I think that that has something to do with the ego and with the ego's values and the ego's pleasure. I think it has really everything to do with that, because I believe, and I could be wrong about this, that creating in a negative way um, feeds the ego. If you're taking joy in something that's negative, your ego is getting gratified. And I mean, take an example I just thought of. Like, let's say, for instance, that um, you're going to stay in your room and sulk when you know your kids are outside and everybody's having a miserable day, but you're angry and you're just going to do your own thing, watch TV, and fuck them. And that's a negative pleasure because this is for myself and I don't want to give, I don't want to do. But then you decide to yourself, I'm going to go out, I'm going to get the kids together, we're going to go out, play a baseball game, or we're going to enjoy ourselves and do something fun. Even though I don't really want to do it, I'm selfish, I want to do this something for myself. You go out and you have a good time with everyone else, and then you feel a pleasure, a joy in giving and relating. So you haven't really, you're feeling pleasure in a different what's the word, in a different situation. You've traded one kind of pleasure for another. Does that make sense? We
Not
can
totally.
not totally. Okay, we can explore this. Let me go through these other steps, and then we
So,
can
Okay.
explore.
so I wanted to add something
Kevin,
just for a
Kevin, go
second, though. I
ahead.
mean, because Alan, it was amazing. It's synchronicity, I think, because was it 2 nights ago, I was watching a movie with my children, and It's a Wonderful Life. I'm sure everybody is pretty well aware of it and whatnot. And it's a movie that means a lot to me, and maybe it was a little bit over their head and so forth. But at the end of the movie, they kind of got up and just left the room. And, and I was kind of personally let down by it, and I wasn't expecting it to happen. But that kind of, when you said sulking a second ago and not going outside, I just got this flashback of me sitting in front of the TV with the family dispersed suddenly, and me going, and suddenly I had a choice, right? I had a choice either to nurse that wound and to then apply that outwardly into my relationships and carry that torch of hurt even further. And that's negative creation in that moment. Or, like Alan said, I could have made that choice at some point to let that go and turn all of that energy into the positive creation of connection and of receiving and maybe probing and maybe seeing if I've misread something about their dispersion. You know, maybe it was something again from my past that I saw people leaving the room as being indicative of, you know, me being isolated or me being, you know, abandoned or something. Who knows? But you know, it gave me the opportunity in that moment to go, whoa, I should check myself.
And I think
So,
it's sort of illustrative that the ego's pleasure is often solitary,
yeah,
right? And the higher self's pleasure is more in giving and relating to others.
yeah,
So in step 3, where you see the effects of negativity, work through the exact consequences and ramifications of your negative production without glossing over any detail, any effect, or side effect. Realize the precise understanding of the harmful effects on you and others. You cannot harm yourself without harming others, and vice versa. Now, that's obviously a truth that too many people forget, right? That's because in reality, everyone is the one universal self. See that the pleasure you obtain from negative creation is never worth the price paid for it, because you sacrifice joy, peace, self-esteem, inner security, expansion and growth, pleasure on all levels of being, and a meaningful and fearless existence. I love these lists of things you either have to be aware of or you sacrifice, right? See how your negative creation affects others, then realize that the pleasure does not have to be given up, but the same pleasure will be greater when translated into positive creation. Desire to give up the negative. Make the link between the negative creating and, quote, what you deplore in your life. So, and then he says, note what makes you unhappy. All the things you make you unhappy are direct effects of deliberately wanted negative attitudes. Now that's kind of a lot to take in also. You know, that whatever makes you unhappy is a direct effect of deliberately wanted negative attitudes. That's certainly something to think about. All right, and then the 4th step, the final step, is what the guide says, the actual process of recreating soul substance. This is when basically you employ the Pathwork model of educating the negative and the lower self by teaching it. He says, by meditation, by prayer, by formulating deliberate thoughts of truth about this entire matter and impressing them onto your destructive psychic material, recreation begins and continues as you become more adept. So, exploring and understanding the will to the negative and the negative creation opens the way to transformation. He says step 4 is issuing the intention and calling on the higher powers to help uncover the fact that the feelings of being injured are not real at all. So basically, the pathwork is a big invitation to give up victimhood in any way that it might strike you, or in any way that you might formulate it. All right, so I think I've hit some of the high points here. And then he says something at the very end about initiating negativity and responsive negativity. And the lecture seems to end abruptly. You know, I think, Kevin, we got to go back to the audio because it seems like it kind of ends where he's talking about this thing about initiating and responsive. Now, that makes a lot of sense. Obviously, most of us, I think, don't initiate negativity, but it's hard not to respond to negativity with negativity. And he says, it's natural to respond with negativity, but, quote, this is not the way of truth. The way of truth, it seems, is acceptance of others' negativity as not being created by yourself. And I'm reminded of Christ's admonition to turn the other cheek, right? Hey, it's not me, you know. You say, as Jesus keeps saying in the gospel, you know, you said it, right? They say, are you this? Are you that? Are you the king of the Jews? Are you? And he says, you said it. Did you blaspheme? You said it. You know, in other words, not hooking in, kind of saying, this is who I am. I'm not hooking into your judgments or your negativity. All right, so that's my summary, everyone, and let's talk a little bit about this lecture and tell me what thoughts came to you and what you're mulling over, what you're thinking about.
May I go back to my earlier question?
Of course, Darlene.
So one of my favorite negative pleasures is being right. Being right about things. You know what I mean by that. And so I had a situation recently where I just really, I don't know what turned me around, but I just really got to the place where I was like, this other person actually is doing the right thing, is better than me, blah, 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 whatever it was. And so instead of having this negative pleasure in being right and kind of judging or criticizing them, I actually now kind of have like a joy, I don't know if it's pleasure, but like of actually being in the right way with her. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
and
I mean,
is that like an example?
That's what I call is not an ego pleasure. It's a more a higher self pleasure. It's a different kind of pleasure. It's better. It's better. You've traded one kind of pleasure for another, I think. Because what happens when a situation like that, when you give in to what you believe is true or what you know is true, there's a certain kind of relaxation that takes place, I think.
Yeah.
Right? It's like,
Yeah.
I may not be gratified, my ego may not be gratified, but I know this is right.
Yeah, there's just a peace and a rest about it instead of the tension and fighting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense to me now. Thanks.
Teresa, what do you think? What are your thoughts? Anyone?
Hi.
Hi.
Is the other Teresa here? Or is...
I don't think she's here.
Yeah.
You're the only.
Yeah. Well, I mentioned to the group, I haven't been here in a few weeks, but I mentioned to the group that in the TP program we're in, it's the year of negative intention. So this lecture I've been reading, and I've spent a lot of time with it already, but actually a different view on a couple things is really helpful, because when Darlene was asking about the negative to the positive, I sometimes think of that as being like just stopping the negative, like noticing it and then saying, well, I'm not going to act on it, and kind of letting it go. And that kind of just makes room for the positive, and then, something can come that's unexpected. So in terms of like accepting what is versus trying to plan the outcome of how things are going to go, it's like just stopping and getting out of the way, kind of. So I've been working with that. But then when you were talking about step 4, like I was reading about how it was, praying for help and asking for help, but I didn't think of like the more active piece of the education, teaching the part of you that has been, set the negative intention, and then allowing it to be used, your uneducated part to be used by it. So, I've been actually working on a very specific example in my life where I had this revelation of how a part of me is used by the negative intention that I was, how it works. Like I had a really clear opening of how it works. And I was trying to think of like the next steps of what to do with that, which would be step 3, like try to associate the pain, right? With
when he says you have to go over all the ramifications of the negativity,
right,
the price you pay for it.
Right. So I've kind of known the price I've paid without knowing how it works. So the steps kind of have overlapped in a way. But that last piece of like setting, like doing the education, because I've even seen since then, I've seen that pattern show up in different ways, and I stop, and then I kind of don't know what to do with it. But it's almost like you do have to really make the conscious intention of the new the positive intention.
Right. Well,
So
it's difficult.
it's really hard. I'm at a level that's really, it feels deeper for me than I've ever gone. So
Yeah,
I feel
because I think, yeah, we have to realize that the ego doesn't want to do this. I mean, and the
Yeah.
ego is where we are most of the time. Like it just
Yeah.
doesn't want to. It doesn't want to take these steps. Doesn't want to examine the negativity. Doesn't want to see what the price we're paying. It just wants to chuck the whole thing. So we're really fighting. You're really paddling upstream, I think, to do some of this work.
Yeah, and just the last thing I wanted to say is, when you were saying most of us don't initiate, I really think I do still. Like it was really shocking and eye-opening to realize that I do that. Because I would think on the outside too, like, oh, I don't do that. Like I would never, like I'm not a criminal, like all those things. But in this particular instance where I have a lot of unhappiness, I'm causing it. And as I'm unraveling it, I'm seeing that I even initiate causing it. Like I keep going back to it. So this is really,
Right. So and again, the guide always says, where you are in your life is a good yardstick as to your spiritual development and what you need to work on. If there are difficult areas of your life, it means something, right? If things keep getting recreated in a difficult way, it means something. Hey, but listen, everyone, I'm so sorry that we didn't introduce ourselves because of the glitch in the beginning of the meeting. Hi, Nancy. You brought a friend of yours over. I can see that. Hi, greetings. Thanks for coming. And can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
You talking to me, Alan?
Your friend. What's her name?
Andrea?
Yes.
AA?
AA. Yes.
Yeah. You want me? She's a friend of Beverly and mine.
Okay.
And
Okay.
she's part of our internal family systems therapy study group.
All right. Well, welcome aboard. Thanks for coming. Thanks for coming to our discussion meeting. All right. Does anyone else have any thoughts? Tracy, I always want to hear from you, and I can't see you, unfortunately. Are you there?
Well, I'm here. I'm having some trouble with my video for some reason tonight, so you'll have to just bear with me and listen to me. Can you hear me?
Hear you fine.
Okay, fine. I must have disabled the video in my continuous attempts to zoom in tonight while we were working on it. Well, I think the one thought I have is that I've been working with this lecture for years, and the breakthrough that I got with this was on step 3, when I really allowed myself to see the destruction that my own negative creations was causing. It became quite apparent pretty quickly that it really wasn't worth the pleasure that it was giving me. So I got, step 1, seeing and facing up to where I was creating negativity. That step probably took a couple of years because who wants to own up to that. And then seeing the pleasure, that one came kind of quickly, because you can feel it. It's like, oh, I'm going to get them back, or I'm going to show them, or whatever. So that was an easy step for me. I stumbled on the 3rd step for years, because really unraveling and working to the core of what I had done and the consequences of it, and really allowing myself to see that, then it became apparent that it really wasn't worth the price. So once I got to that point, the rest became almost happened as a byproduct, if you will, because it's like, well, if it's not worth it, you have to be kind of, almost self-masochistic to continue, because it's just not logical to continue behavior that is causing more harm, where you're in a deficit, where it just doesn't add up for you. but I found, you know, once I broke through that particular level, it sort of, what happened to me anyway was I I just didn't want to do it anymore. I just didn't have the instinct, the desire, the motivation to continue that behavior. And it's something kind of, and I never really got to the fourth step directly. I think I came through that also through the back door because I never really was able to make the transition. Well, if I'm creating negatively, then I have the power to create positively. I didn't get that at all in my head. It was like, well, of course you can screw things up. Anybody can screw things up, but that's a far cry from, you know, actually manifesting something that's positive. But what happened to me in my case was that once I eliminated, or I didn't eliminate because I still do it, but diminished over you know many years the number of incidences where I was creating negatively, that left a vacuum, and my desire, my innate desire to create, the vacuum was filled with positive creations, not because I actually could see that I could do it and like, oh, you know, it's like, no, you know, I never really got that, but it just kind of, it was a byproduct again, if you will, that because we all want to create. I mean, we're just imbued with this desire to manifest and to create. And so if we're not using up all of our chips doing something negative, then the vacuum sort of gets filled as a byproduct with just doing things that were positive. So those were that was my own personal experience. But I picked this lecture because I found it, you know, really a difficult, for me, it was a very difficult, it took at least 5 years of, you know, a lot of work with this particular lecture to really be able to face the point three. I stumbled on part three, on step three for years and years and years and years. So I thought that if I chose this lecture, that maybe I would be able to tell this little story, which you were so nice to set up and ask me to talk. Yes, Joel's asking what step three is. So step three is where you really allow yourself the full realization of the harm and the consequences that your negative creation is doing. Because, you know, what step two is like, it's easy to see step two. It's like, oh yeah, because, you know, it's like, oh, I'm going to get them back. You know, this person screwed me over, that person screwed me over, and I'm like, you know, you're like, you know, planning your revenge or whatever, and it feels good. It's like, oh yeah, they're gonna pay the price for that or whatever, and all that feels really good and justified in some kind of weird way, you know, at some point in your development. But then when you really see the destruction that it causes, not just for them, but of course for yourself, because, and this would be something that the guide had also talked about, which is that you can't hurt somebody else without hurting yourself. It's impossible. And, you know, that's not only because of karma, you know, which everything you push out into the universe is reflected back to you, but it's also because of the connection that we all have below the surface. So, you know, I kind of think of life now as like, you know, here we are on Earth, and like all of our little faces are like, you know, little faces on the surface of the planet. And they all appear and are in fact differentiated. But then right below the surface, you like with Avatar, like with that movie with Avatar, you see the roots, and we all are connected. We're like leaves on a tree, but we're all part of the same tree. And so if you destroy one, you know, even one leaf of a tree, much less one branch or whatever, you hurt the whole tree, because everything is ultimately connected below the surface. But because of the way we approach, you know, consciousness at the form level, we appear and in fact are separated and differentiated. So for a while in your spiritual journey, you think you can kind of get away with it, like, oh, I can hurt this person over here and get away with it, it's not going to affect me. But eventually you get to the point where you realize, no, that's not true. It's, you know, and it's not just karma. Of course it is karma, because that's also one of the basic laws, you know, that whatever you push out into the universe will reflect back to you. But it's also because of this underlying connection that we all have to the source, which is, of course, ultimately what we are. You know, we are life. We are the universal consciousness just manifested in individualized forms. So anyway, I think I'm repeating myself at this point.
Yeah, well, thanks for the explanation. And, you know, I really respect you so much for being such an engine of transformation that you are in your own personal life. I mean, I know you did a lot. You've really done a lot to get here, Tracy.
And so have you, Ellen, and everybody else on this call. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be a part of this group and to witness the different progresses and transformations that we're all making. And of course, it's a synergistic as we help ourselves, we help the others, because we set an example and a roadmap.
Right. Yeah, you know, I think that that's kind of what the protests are saying, that we're all connected. We're all under the surface. I think the people are really saying, hey, you know, those roots are all connected. We're all connected, everybody. And that's the bottom line. And everyone's a human being.
Yeah.
Yeah, Alan and Tracy too. Tracy's last point, Course in Miracles says that giving is the proof of having, okay? And that you share by giving what you presently have. And when you try to give conflict away and be in conflict with someone and blame that conflict on someone else, you're setting yourself up to own and hold that conflict because it's real now to you internally, because it's proof of having that internally. And you'll never get around being able to give away a conflict. Because as soon as you try to give it outward, because we are all connected, like Tracy was saying, we're all connected as one universal being. It always stays residing within your being. And you'll always guard, what's the hardest part is you'll always guard against it creeping back in to your ego self somehow. You're always constantly on guard. Oh, they're going to pin that back on me. Okay. Yeah. Well, that's a defensiveness posture. So, you know, there's no way you can give away something and get rid of it. Okay. Yeah. Giving is the way you keep it.
Yeah.
And that, I think, was key here for negativity.
Okay. Tardia, what's in your thoughts? I always force you to talk about something. Are you okay?
Yeah, and I mean, first, when I was unable to get to the Zoom, I was saying, oh, is this now my negativity that's coming into play? And then my computer crashed, but then I got my iPad working. Then eventually I was able to come here, but by now I have, of course, lost what you have said. I know that negativity still comes up for me at times. It's very easy for me when I hear something that I do not agree with. I mean, instead of saying something or just keeping quiet, I charge out, and then while I'm doing it, I said, oh, I shouldn't have said that. And then I try to make it backpedal a little bit so it doesn't become a big issue or anything. But I haven't been able to totally stop my behavior yet. I know that there's a lot of negativity in me.
Do you feel the pleasure in it? Do you feel the pleasure you take in it?
I do for one millisecond, I feel the pleasure, and then, you know, I just let it go. The other side comes out. So I guess I'm still gonna be working on this for a long time.
Yeah, many lifetimes, right?
Yeah.
Joel, you want to say something? Can't hear you.
Okay, he's going to use my phone.
Okay. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay. So when I was reading the lecture, there was one part that really struck me, and I was having, you know, it was like that whatever persona that we want to, or that we do project of ourselves in the world. So let's say I present myself well physically. Let's use that as an example. That this is masking some form of a negative aspect of myself. So maybe so if we just stay with that, maybe I would say, well, it's masking my vulnerability, my my mortality. So I was, and then I was thinking about this, and then I was reading this book just a little while ago about something about forgiving ourselves, and one of the exercises was to and what I'm getting to is how do we identify some of these negative aspects of ourselves, right? Especially when we are in our mask, and when we, good Lord, we're just struggling so hard to maintain our good aspects, right? Much less to start delving into the deeper aspects of our negative aspects. Anyway, it said identify somebody that you don't like, and make a list of the things about this person that bother you, and and then find those aspects in yourself. And so I did that. I thought about somebody that makes me angry, and I started to make the list, and maybe I made 5 different items, and then for each one I looked in to see how is that in myself. And so I found that was a very helpful exercise that I hope to continue to do, because it's so easy when we dislike somebody and we kind of get juiced up by that hatred or the judgment, the condemnation, and it's always self-justifying, right? Oh, well, they did this and they did that, and then it gets very distracting from really getting to how that's part of ourself. And of course, not to mention the fact that if it's somebody who's a part of our life in a meaningful way, maybe a member of our family, it completely separates us from our love that we have for this person. And it's not good. So anyway, I just offered that as a way that's helpful, that was very helpful for me to start to unravel some of these deeper negative traits and aspects, to bring them to light by looking at the projection.
Yeah, I think that's a very valuable, helpful exercise, to see somebody that you dislike and then understand and reflect the fact that it's really parts of yourself that you dislike, or that you don't want to acknowledge or admit. You don't want to, maybe you're ashamed of them. And
Yeah.
because the other person seems to outpicture those things that you're ashamed of, you hate them, you're angry. Yeah, true. It's just the other person is a mirror. I think the guy talks about that's the mask self, or the idealized self-image. Yeah, also kind of comes into the Pathwork concept of pretending to be what you really are. It's kind of like a mirror image of that thing, which is that, you act like you're a really good and benevolent person because you want everybody else to respect you, and you're serene and above it all. And underneath it, you're afraid, you're insecure, and you're angry. But even underneath that, you're a good and benevolent person, right? So you're pretending to be what you really are. But there's a level of shit between the, layer cake, right? Deep underneath, there's the real self that's authentic and honest, and that people see. But then you are so busy defending underneath that surface layer that you screw everything up, and people, right?
Yeah.
We are.
Well, Alan, to Joel's point, Marta, right? She ended up sending me recently this quote that speaks to Joel's point. It's the more something annoys us, the more it is destined for us, necessary for us. Once it stops to irritate us, it becomes redundant because the lesson has been learned. And I thought that quote was so true.
So true. Well, that's the whole concept of attachment, right? What you're attached to, magnetized by. So Beverly, what are your thoughts?
I'm just thinking, to Joel's point, so is that to say that if one were an enlightened person, they could look on cruelty and all forms of evil and not feel anything but compassion towards the person engaging in that behavior. There'd be no level of criticism. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, of judgment.
Yeah, like at what point do you look on something that, well, is there anything that's objectively evil and not good?
Oh, I think there definitely is. I mean, the guide makes a point that anger is not negative necessarily. You know, there can be righteous anger, right?
Right.
Obviously, in the Bible, Jesus threw over the tables, the money changers, and he was righteously angry that they were defiling
Yeah.
the temple by being there, buying and selling, or converting one kind of currency into another, right? And the righteous anger. I mean, I think there's definitely room for righteous anger. I think some of these protesters feeling some righteous anger.
Right.
I can get behind that.
Mhm.
But I think that this is a deep question about how one reacts to cruelty. And interesting because number one, it can't affect you unless you're somehow tied into it. But perhaps it's also possible that some people have a task of meeting and confronting cruelty and suffering pain. I mean, Christ had that task, didn't he? He had the task of suffering.
Yeah.
Or to make a point, more than to make a point. I mean, he had a task to fulfill in terms of the salvation of the human race, according to the guide. That was a task that he willingly took on, and that involved him experiencing cruelty and suffering.
Right.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, Beverly, to your point, I wanted to mention that we're so used to being annoyed at the things we wish to have change. And that tends to have us notice that that we live inside that ego annoyance. And so it's a muddy water, our motivation for change sometimes. And that makes it hard to imagine what it must be like when the waters are not as muddy inside of us, and yet we still work for change. Okay, I believe there will come a point where the beauty that we can envision and the beauty that we can outpicture as well within ourselves, we can discern that and compare that with what's in the world at some point when our waters are not as muddy. And then we will easily see the things which we would like to change so that we can honor the God self as an outpicturing in the world, right? And not because they annoy us, not because they muddy our own internal waters, but because we wish to honor the Christ that we both can see within and outwardly in the world. And maybe perhaps other aspects of the world may not necessarily see it at that moment, but even at that, there probably will come a point where we can't even point the finger, I would imagine. But that kind of path, to me, is the path in God, not the path to God. Because once you see God, you walk in God for a long time with God. And it takes a long time to be able to hold that hand, or to see that hand as not outside of us to hold at all, and to see it within us. And then to honor what we see, just like Alan was saying, not to stick that middle layer in there, which I thought was an amazing way to put it, that we're the ones putting the middle layer in between what we really are and then what we claim to be. It's just kind of ironic. It's like, who needs the cream in the Oreo then? It's like, it's fine. Just be, be the whole thing,
Yeah.
And basically, there's no inner experience. There's no, putting the pebble in the water. There's no ripples
There's
when
no
you are looking
amplification.
upon something that is objectively not
Well,
good.
there's no amplification is what I've heard it talked about before. There's no amplification based upon what's disturbed within us and waiting to be amplified, right? So when we see something which does not honor the beauty of creation in the world, we could still make practical measures outside of the ego in the God self to change those things, because we want to work towards what we see as a creation inside of Christ, inside of the outpicturing of Christ into the world.
Mhm.
right? So we honor that, and we want to grow in beauty. Beauty is one of the things that we want. We would love the world around us to show the beauty of what we can feel inside of God and what we experience inside the God self. Obviously, we're not always doing that. And sometimes we fight things thinking that fighting things because they annoy us is the only agent of change. No, it's not the only agent of change. It is a necessary agent of change while we are stuck within the ego. And substantially stuck within the ego, it's going to be a damn well pretty much only route to agent of change, right? But then there comes a point where that agent of change does shift, I believe. And I think the Pathwork talks about that, because the motivations do change in time.
Mm.
Thank you.
Mm.
That's
Mm.
very intense.
Mm.
Yeah.
That was beautifully put. Sometimes I'm glad that I record these.
Oh, you do?
I'm recording it. If that's
You
okay.
rat.
I wish I remembered exactly what you just said.
You rat.
Oh, man.
Um, Lorraine, what are your thoughts? Do you have any reflections on this lecture?
Well, just like last time, what drew me to join was the intensity of this lecture. When I didn't get to read the whole thing, unfortunately, but just the beginning of it is exactly something I've just been going through. So it was so pertinent that I was like, I need to be in this group tonight. And I see how intense and deep it can go, and I see all the work I have to do and see that, it's so easy to skirt really what's these deeper layers, hiding and hidden in these dark places. So I just feel like it's so synchronistic because of something that I just went through. And I was thinking about that whole idea of forgiveness, like how do we, and I appreciate, I forgot who spoke about the thing about making a list of all your things that you don't like in the other person. But the idea of
Yes.
how do we deal with the, the trigger and not want to, turn around and trigger back, obviously being self-aware and noticing, but just not stopping it is not going to be the answer. It's like then, the forgiveness piece. I would guess I was questioning that the forgiveness is not enough, like to just forgive the person, just to let it go. There still could be a hook there. And so I guess what struck me about forgiving myself for getting angry, or forgiving myself.
I mean, do you connect with the negative pleasure in it? Do you feel that?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, but it's the third part, the third step.
Mm-hmm.
Really, that needs the exploration. Yeah.
Yeah.
And how, I'll just speak briefly about what I did. Something happened with a student of mine that had not acted with integrity. And so I was trying to find a way. I'm like, well, how can I, deal with this situation and be a wise woman about it? But underneath the way I was dealing with it was still this negative pleasure.
Mm.
And so after it all transpired, I realized that did not feel good, even though I thought I was being the wise woman and handling it. So it's, fooling myself. Yeah, that it was not the right thing.
Realize the precise understanding of the harmful effects on you and others. Yeah. It's difficult. I mean, did you write it down? Did you, in your daily review, or did you kind of take notes, or did you just kind of come to the realization?
No, I just came to the realization, but now with this lecture, I have a direction of where I have to go, where the contemplation and the inner work has to go.
That's good.
Yeah.
These negative situations are kind of magnetic, you know, the ego kind of seeks them out, tries to, you know, I kind of feel like it's one of those things where, like you're in a boat and you're trying to avoid these little whirlpools or treacherous currents or little islands where you could get I don't know, run aground, and you got to be vigilant.
Yeah,
That,
well, I can see how this is going to go down the rabbit hole and be connected to everything else. It's the key to the,
yeah.
yeah.
Hey, Marion, we haven't heard from you yet. Are you there?
Hi, I'm here. I also don't have a video camera, but I can see everybody, and it is so joyful to connect with all of you. And this lecture, I just appreciate everybody sharing because there's so much here. And I'll just share because I like to connect and have some empathy sometimes. And that is what stands out to me in my process of this, doing this, working on this for so long, is that so many of the other lectures pop into my head like, hey, okay, the personality defense, I'm a big promoter of that, the personality defense types, because I'm the emotion type, and I'm not going to react like the reason type or the will type. So one of our lectures, I think the defense lecture we did a few months ago, and the guy very specifically said, notice when you go into your defense, what kind of defense it is. I'm not quoting, I'm paraphrasing, but it's like, know your defense type. And I thought, mine's that emotion type. I'm not going to go, pout and sulk. I'm going to give up my power to somebody else. And I'm going to look pleading and be pleasing and maybe brush my hair a little more or something. And then, but underneath what is unconscious, which I know now because I'm very conscious of it, is I'll hate you because you're my jailer. You're the one that's, so it's knowing what's in the unconscious and what those personality types. So I'm very, very grateful for that because I'm working with that every day. And the guy did say, and I'm paraphrasing, we use our early childhood experience as a gateway for transformation our whole life. So this lecture has it in it, mentions it, I don't have it underlined here, about going back into the childhood. And there's the recreation of childhood hurts lecture and the God image lecture, because the guide is saying here, you can't do this alone. You don't do this work alone. It's in this lecture. It takes help. So what stands out to me is this one, the positive is effortless. Well, that's where my lower self comes up. And I want to say, are you kidding? I'm the hardest worker you ever saw, and I never got anything easy, and, to hell with you. So I can go into that very easily, even as life gets easier and I have some marvelous things. A little thing like I'm here, isolated, live alone, and I'm trying to order my vitamins from catalogs because my store is closed, and it's so frustrating. And then I applied for that self-employment benefit, and something happened with that. Then my smoke alarm goes off as I'm sitting here and I thought, what else? So it's beeping, beeping, beeping. I have to get a ladder out of my storage closet. I have to get up on it, make sure I don't have socks on so I don't fall off this ladder, and get up there, take it down, read the instructions. I haven't looked at this in, year and a half or two, and deal with my smoke alarm. It's carbon monoxide. So I did, and finally it occurred to me, call somebody, get some help. People like me tend to want to be so self-sufficient and submissive and try to do it all myself, and it doesn't work. It just is so painful. So finally, because of what the guide says in here, you can't do it alone, and stresses more meditation and prayer. So that means a deeper connection with God. Oh my gosh, it gives me chills. Can't do this without that. So with that, what came in was inspiration, comes in my right temple, and I looked it up. I never looked up my smoke alarm people online before, and there they are, first alert. I called the number. The guy was so helpful. And my landlord puts it in. I rent my place. So they would have to be responsible for it. So I thought, oh, I got to call them and get the thing replaced. And oh, God, you know, this is so, getting help is really a bum deal. So then the guy says to me, try it again, put it up, see if it's worn out or not. But there's a warranty on that for another 2 years. Because put up, you know, and I will send you a replacement in case the whole unit is worn out. I get the chills right now. And tears come to my eyes that I surrendered to listening to my intuition. Because what is intuition? The balance of the head and the heart, with the heart leading the way. That's intuition, and that is God. So this lecture, when I see that the positive is effortless, I'm always working with that one. I'm always trying to do it myself first. And so I just wanted to share that because I identify with the whole lecture, but that really stands out to me. So thank you, and I appreciate everybody sharing. And I will keep doing my best to surrender and notice when I'm trying to do everything myself and I feel just exhausted. No, what the guide says, everything's already here right now. Oh, I don't have to work hard. I need to hear that. Everybody remind me. All of you guys remind me I don't have to work hard. Thank you. I pass.
Yeah. Thanks, Marion.
Yeah.
Yeah, the positive is effortless. That's kind of a daunting phrase. You know, it's another paradox, right? I mean, the path takes effort, but at some point also, you know, I think it really comes down to the ego. Because for the ego, everything is difficult. Everything is an effort. Everything is, how am I going to appear? How am I doing in relationship to other people? Am I getting enough? But when you're involved in an effort from the higher self, it doesn't feel the same way. I'm not sure if I go.
That's the road less traveled. The first sentence is life is difficult. And then the rest of the first paragraph says, the rest of the book, I guess, says, it's been a long time, but the first sentence is life is difficult. And once you know life is difficult, it's not difficult anymore.
Yeah, that says it all. That says it all. Yeah,
Once
Nancy, what are your thoughts?
Did you say my name?
Yes, I did. I'm putting you on the
Oh,
spot.
great. Well, the thing that struck me was one of the things you cited, the life-defeating spiteful resistance to good feelings.
Yes.
You know, I kind of suspected that I had that. And it was so great to see it in black and white. I think it's really one of the ways I got back at my parents was not to have good feelings.
Yeah.
And it's so deep and so early. But it's now, and I am capable of having more positive feelings. But my ego pulls me back right afterwards and says, no, you can't do that. I've noticed that throughout my entire life, that if I get excited or happy or things go well, I can predict the ego saying, no, come on back. That wasn't
Having
right.
Having the wrong kind of pleasure, and I don't like it.
What?
You're having the wrong kind of pleasure, and I don't like it.
Yeah, I don't like it.
I don't like it.
And counterbalancing that is actually listening to John McCransky of the Barry Center of Buddhist Studies. And I took the course along with Beverly and I think Kay about setting up a caring moment and then amplifying what that feels like and bringing it into your whole body. And I've done it some, and it really works. I can feel the internal barriers disappearing, at least temporarily. And because I'm being held in that field of care, which is also my higher self. And that's been really a revelation about, because so much of my my issues are in just incredible tension in my body and tightness. And this is, I think it has promise if I can stay with it, if I can lead my ego to stay with it.
We have to also identify the negative pleasure, and as the guide says, you have to look at the specific ways in which the negativity expresses itself and kind of what you get out of it.
Yeah. So yeah, I know from experiences with my parents how much pleasure I got over embarrassing them, and
Yeah.
so, and I think this new thing of life-defeating spiteful resistance to good feelings, that's really new for me to be working on. But the pleasure is that it feels like I'm safe if I do that. I'm
Right.
not going to get hurt.
Right. So that comes into the price you're paying, of course.
Yeah, that's the price.
When
I'm
you
paying. Yeah.
when you feel safe, what are you really saying? You're saying, I'm giving up a lot of things, other things I could experience. I'm giving those things up.
Yeah.
I'm not going to venture into those areas. So I'm impoverishing myself.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's helpful. Thank you, Alan. Yeah.
Well, my friends, any other thoughts? We could have our meditation.
Oh,
What do you think?
Marion has a thought
Marion.
that can I share that? Because everybody here on this call, because I know I'm at different places in different areas of my life, and I've done the work. However, it comes up again because I need to also help others. And something I just love is in the false lecture. Of course, it's when you're getting more or toward the fourth step. In the false lecture is that positive divine aspect of every lower self quality. Right. That is the saving grace for me, because I've been so hard on myself. I was for so long hard on myself. And that it brings tears to my eyes that if I'm judging somebody else, I know I'm reaching for the divine aspect of discernment. So I've gotten over judging that I'm judging. I don't do that anymore, judging me as being a judger. No. What is the divine aspect? What am I really discerning about that person? And what does it have to do with me? I have some really powerful questions. And that if I am isolating, and I thought, oh my gosh, I haven't been calling people, I haven't been arranging a walk, 6 feet apart with somebody, and I'm being so alone. I'm looking to do my 2 meditations a day because I've been skipping one of them. And my reaching into God and reaching inward more. Okay, I'll come out again. So that saving grace for me is that there is a divine aspect at the core of every lower self quality. So there's a surprise, I call it a reward, and an excitement. Let me go into it. Let me go in the dark side. But as the guide said, you do not do this work without, and the guide used a metaphor, you don't do it without the hand of God. So the God can be another person supporting, God can be a meditation, whatever. So that's my excitement.
Well, I find that to be so very valuable and wonderful. Like you said, Marianne, the positive aspects of the negative, the transformational, what every negative aspect has, which is kind of the hidden positive quality.
Yeah.
It takes away the sting of the negative when you really realize that there's a positive side or a positive essence. And also, of course, the so valuable concept that good and bad, it's one energy current, and that the energy itself can be changed, the direction of the energy. It's the same energy, but it can just be harnessed or changed, put in a different way. Are there any others of those aspects that you want to roll out for me, for us?
Alan, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Alan, can you hear me?
Yes, Joel.
I'm sorry, I missed what you asked, but I just wanted to offer one more thing, adding on to what Marion was saying, which kind of gurgled up into my consciousness when I was trying to understand the lecture, which was the point that's made throughout a lot of the lectures, which is just the observation of our fault or our limitation. And I don't even like the word fault, but our negative aspect that we want to transform. The reassurance that simply recognizing it, seeing it, will begin the process of that transformation. And I don't mean to say that in any way to diminish the importance of the process that's outlined here. But I just offered as a form of kind of reassurance that process is, the ball is rolling once we see it.
Yes, that's a good point. A very good point, Joel. And Kevin points out in the chat that there is a lecture that has the list of those positive original qualities of lower self manifestations. It's lecture 219. And that's something to meditate on every day. Just a beautiful thing to meditate on.
Yes, and let me just interject. It's Marion. In training class, we had to make a long, long list. I mean, they were really long, pages long, of all negative qualities, and then use our imagination, our creativity of what's the positive aspect of that, because we were using the false lecture, and it's have some fun with this. It's what, because I'm helping some people, not professionally, but in some of my support groups, so I'm not being their helper, but I am helping, and it's a mutuality. They're giving to me, and I'm giving them, and I see the people who just do not even. Smart people don't have this grounding of these steps, the map laid before them. And I say you've got to have a roadmap, and the Pathwork gives us a roadmap, where we've come from, where we are, where we're going. Because I have to go back to first step. Every time I do something expansive, I go back to step one. Yeah. So thank you.
Right. And that is my problem with therapy. With therapy, there's no roadmap. Of course, the guy that the Pathwork is not therapy. But I think you do need a roadmap.
Yeah.
All right, my friends. It's kind of nice how the guide always talks to my friends, my friends. It's very nice. Maybe I'll read a passage from the lecture and then we can have a 10-minute meditation. What do you guys think? All right, I'll read 2 paragraphs and we'll have our 10-minute meditation, okay?
Thank you.
Where we try to impress these things into our consciousness and deeply impress them into the part of ourself, the creative part of ourselves, so we can create positively. All right, here we go. In order to reestablish the being you were long before this earth life, before you became involved with negative creating, and to re-experience yourself as that eternal you, which you essentially and ultimately are, you have to consider and test the possibility of positive creating. You will then see that to create positively is really so much more natural and easy. It is an organic process. Negative creating and destructive attitudes are artificial and contrived, even though you are now so used to them that they seem more natural. The positive is effortless. Offhand, it seems that to abandon the negative, It has become so much second nature to you as too great an effort. It seems too great because you still believe that by giving up negativity, you create a positivity that is something completely new. If this were so, to create it would indeed be quite impossible in most instances. But the moment you realize that the positive creation is already there within you, only covered up, and that it can unfold and reveal itself the moment you allow this to happen, abandoning negativity becomes a relief from a heavy burden that has pulled you down all your life and in many lives before this one. While you hate, distrust, take a dim view of things, or prevent a favorable outcome by expecting the worst, the ability already exists in you to love, trust, and know that life is good and can be trusted. All this and more exists within you already and needs only to be allowed to surface like the sun coming out from behind the clouds. You will see that it is possible to feel this positive undercurrent. Simultaneously, you will experience the deep joy that permeates the entire being of any person making this discovery. When we say that God is within you, we mean precisely this. Not only is the greater consciousness with infinite wisdom of the most personal order available to you at whatever moment you need it, not only are there powers of creative strength and energy, feelings of bliss, joy, and pleasure supreme available to you on all levels, but also right underneath where you are ill with your negativity, a new old life exists in which all reactions to all possible contingencies are clear, strong, and entirely satisfying and right for each occasion. A resiliency and creativity of reacting already exists now, behind the false roles of pretense, beyond the grip of destructiveness. Underneath your outer deadness, a bubbling aliveness already exists. At first it will shine through at moments only. Eventually it will manifest itself as your steady inner center. All right, so let's have our 10 minutes of meditation. Thank you. Thank you, friends.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
You all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Alan and Trace,
Thank you.
and everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for sticking it out with us, Kay. It was great to have you there.
Waiting 23 minutes.
Feel better, okay, Kay?
We're
Thank you,
starting-
everyone.
Yeah, feel better, Kay.
Yeah, feel better, Kay. Please, I send you my love, Kay.
Yeah, same.
And you know, we can always meet by email and this and that, you know, in the interim. And Tracy, you and I will come up with another lecture for next time, which I guess will be in about 3 or 4 weeks from now, right, Tracy? You
I
there?
think it's on.
Okay.
Oh, did she dip?
Yeah.
Bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone. Blessings, blessings.
Blessings, everyone.
Blessings to everyone.
Blessings to everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Kevin.